Hi, and welcome back to a brand new episode here on my podcast, You Can and You Will. And if you can't tell already, I'm so excited because I know I didn't have a guest for the longest time on my podcast. However, this lady, by the way, if you're listening right now, make sure to hop on over to YouTube because she's dropped that gorgeous like inside and out. She is an expert when it comes to all things podcasting. And I really needed to have her on the show because not only is she one of my friends, but also she knows it all. So if you have ever just been considering, contemplating on starting a podcast, she's going to give you all of the things you need. So welcome, Chelsea. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you. I am so excited to be reconnected, and I'm so excited to share everything about podcasting, storytelling, pitching today. I know we're going to have a great conversation.
Oh, we're gonna cover it all. And just know this episode is where you pay on other spaces and places and courses a whole lot of money for because we're gonna drop it all. And we've just been thinking about how long we go back. It must have been at least like 3 years. And just
Yes.
to give a little bit of credibility and props out here. So Chelsea is running her own podcast and I still am obsessed with the title. It's called In My Non-Expert Opinion. You started it in 2017, is that right?
Yes.
And you are in 259 episodes. Can we,
Yes.
I mean, excuse me, ma'am, who else would be better to give us any advice on starting a podcast? And you're covering the topics of mindset, money, entrepreneurship, oh, hey, travel, podcasting, and lifestyle. And I just saw in your story, I'm sorry, but I was laughing. You were at CrossFit and you said you're going to expect that sponsoring paycheck from Nike. So how's that going?
I'm still waiting. I'm going to
And so
be checking it out, but I will be on the lookout. I'll be on the lookout.
yeah, please let me know. I'm just like I'm praying for you. So good.
Please.
No, I just love that. And what I find so admiring is like you also work with people who are starting a podcast, running a podcast. And podcasts, I think are it's still one of those platforms that are almost underestimated, even though podcast is specifically during, you know, the pandemic and everything has been booming, like booming. Like everybody and their mother is listening to podcasts. And the other day I was talking to a friend of mine and she's a lawyer. And she was like, I find it so interesting that you have a podcast. And she was one thinking about running her own podcast. I'm like, yes, you should so be doing that. And that is actually what is inspiring this episode. So let's start from the get-go. Let's
Yes.
call let's take an example so people can actually relate. Let's say one of my clients called Jessica would love to like sort of maybe next to her corporate career start her podcast as a side hustle, but she's overwhelmed just by the thought of it. Where does she start? What does she do?
I would say usually people are overwhelmed for two reasons, and it's either the
Mhm.
tech and all the setup, or they feel like they have nothing to say, or maybe it's a third that they have too many ideas and they're like, I just don't know how to organize them and turn this into a podcast. So with the tech, I would say don't overcomplicate it. There are people, I just saw this on Threads. This girl was hired to do voiceovers for a company, and her voiceover company said, you know what? An easier way to do these voiceovers while you're traveling and on the road is take your phone, put a sock over it, like literally put it in the sock, and then hold it a bit away from your mouth and record, and boom. And she has like perfect sounding audio. So I used to do this as well. I used to take my phone and record on the voice memo app in my closet. Closets are really great because they act
Yeah.
like little sound booths.
Uh-huh.
So I did that in my closet. And like the first, I would say 50 episodes that I did that were solos were on my phone. And people were reaching out to me being like, do you use a studio? Where are you recording this? What microphone do you have? And I'm like, it's all on my phone. So if you're one of these people that's Googling, which microphone and
Hmm.
which audio settings and da da da. Don't worry about that. Just pick one or do the phone trick. The second thing is that you just need a thing to record in, right? You just need a software to capture the audio. There are so many free sites online that do this. There's also Descript, there's GarageBand, there's Audacity, a million different softwares that exist. And then you need an editing software, which again, you can find online. So those are the three things you need. You need to record somewhere, you need to have it in a software to capture it, and then you need somewhere to edit it. That's it. I think once you realize that's all you need to just get the tech done, you will take a deep breath because you don't need
Yeah,
the tripod and the boom
the
arm and the
fancy.
this and the yeah, like the
Yeah,
sound. You get the co-work space and the podcast studio. It's like take a deep breath. You just
it's
need
so
three things.
expensive.
And yeah, it can
Yeah.
be expensive. And that's why I'm like, don't make it expensive. You can start a podcast for like less than $20 if you really want to.
And also, if you have an Apple computer, you even have GarageBand on your computer already. I
Yes,
use it. I've been loving it. I never tried anything else than GarageBand. It's super easy. It's like
exactly.
so intuitive. I love that. So, okay, we got the
It's the
tech
best.
covered. No
Got the
excuses
tech.
over there.
No tech issues. Make it easy, make it affordable. So then let's say you're overwhelmed because you feel like you don't have anything to say. I always push
Mhm.
back on people because I'm like, if you're a human being and you go out to dinner or you have meetings at work or you go on Instagram and you go down rabbit holes or you're on TikTok, you do have something to say. Like you have opinions about things, you have thoughts, beliefs, etc. You do have something to say. It's just about organizing it. And I think an issue that people have is they think that a podcast has to be like investigative journalism or it has to be like it's going to be sponsored by Spotify or something. And I'm like,
Nike.
guys, there are literally sponsored by Nike. There are literally podcasts. I was just listening to a podcast this morning where it's two guys talking about the fish they ate last night and like how it was cooked. And that's this podcast. These guys go on tour. They go on tour. They have
Come
merch.
on.
They're like one of the biggest podcasts, and they just talk about their days, what they did that week, what's on TV. You don't need to say anything that is going to be reviewed by Harvard. And I think that's an issue a lot of people have is they think it has to be really, really educational and professional and, be fact checked and researched. And it can be if you want it to be that, but you can also have fun like me and you are having and just hit up your girlfriend or your neighbor or whoever you want and say, I'd love to chat with you on air. It's not as complicated as it needs to be.
And also, I believe that people figure out immediately if it is you just having fun and, this light and catchy energy. Because typically, if you listen to a podcast, you're looking for some kind of distraction and teachings, obviously, too. But as you just said, you can combine the two. I have one question, which I feel like people are scared of as well. And this is when the imposter hits so good. Like, do you feel like because of podcasts have been booming so much, do you feel like it is oversaturated at this point?
Oh, this is a good question that a lot of people ask me as
Yeah.
well. Like, should I really start one? Because everyone's
Hmm.
starting one. This is my argument. No one has said that about Instagram, and there are like a billion users. No one has said that about TikTok, which also has billions of users. No one has said that about YouTube. No one says that about books. No one says that about any other platform except podcasting, which I think is wild. We have books coming out every
True.
day about health and wellness and spirituality. We have a new TikTok account, a new Instagram account. No one is like, oh, I'm Instagram's too saturated, but there are actually like triple the amount of Instagram accounts and TikTok accounts than there are podcasts. So that's number one is think about why are we only focusing on podcasting as being saturated? The second thing is people want variety. So think of your favorite restaurant right now. Maybe you like Italian food. And you're like, you know what? I like this place down the street because it's really authentic. The chef is from Italy. They cook, very homemade meals. However, there's this pizza spot down the street that if I want a quick slice after I have a beer, I go down there and it's technically Italian because it's pizza, but I like to go there because it's $5 slices and it's quick and on the go. And then there's another place that makes amazing Italian gelato and I like to go there too. So they're technically all Italian restaurants, but they're variety. That's how I think of podcasting. Someone might listen to a comedy podcast and then they want to listen to more comedy podcasts. Like it's this weird thing that happens with podcasting where people think, I already listened to a health and wellness podcast. And so why would I start a health and wellness podcast? And it's because someone is looking for your voice. Someone wants to hear the way you would speak about health and wellness. There are some people that they talk about podcasting, or excuse me, something that I like finances. And I'm like, oh, they just don't talk about it in a fun way. Or I wish they broke down the numbers. And then it's like, okay, you could be the person that creates that podcast. So that's why
Yeah,
I don't believe in the saturated market. The other thing too is most people stop after 7 episodes. So if you get
true.
to
Yes.
10 episodes, you're already in like the top 5%, if not 1% of podcasters.
I heard that if you have, I believe it was 20 or 25 episodes, if you're more in than that, if you have more episodes than that, you're already like hitting it. But the one question, and I'm taking notes here, by the way, for everybody. The one question that I have, I think what goes along with the being scared of this oversaturated space is how am I going to be found? And I know we're talking SEO here. So if you don't know, SEO is search engine optimized. You might have heard this before, meaning that Google can find your episodes. You know, and we're not just talking about the episode title, but the title of your podcast. And by the way, for me personally, I found that the cover picture makes an insane amount of difference. Listen, I don't know how many times I've changed my cover picture. Just recently, I believe like almost 2 weeks ago, I did. And oh boy, that was hitting. So, what would you recommend for people, especially health and wellness is super crowded? Hey, I can tell.
Yeah.
And it is so difficult to be found. What do you recommend?
Yeah, I would say definitely update your titles and have titles that are matching what people are searching for. So if we're talking about search, like what you're saying, let's use an example of, since we're on the health and wellness train right now. Let's say someone is feeling I don't know, bloated. They're not going to search, let's say you have a podcast titled like um detoxifying the cells for the ultimate gut healing. Someone is not searching that. They're going
No,
to be searching, how do
never.
I get rid of bloat, or how do
Yes,
I de-bloat? So your podcast title or your show notes need to match what people are actually searching for. Now you can get more specific when you're talking, and then you can talk about detoxifying the cells and how you're going to do that and cleansing. But you have to think of everyday language that people are using and how people search. They're usually like on a commute, or they're waiting in line at the store, or they're in bed at night, like Googling with one eye open. They're not typing very like serious long words, right? They're
no,
like,
that
so you also have to think that search is not limited to Google. It's also TikTok, it's Spotify, it's
YouTube.
YouTube.
Yes.
Anything that you type in a search is a search engine optimization that you need to be optimizing for. So I like to also go on TikTok and Instagram and just see what people are searching and see if my titles can match that, or at least maybe my social content, so that again, when people are trying to find me, that my episode will pop up because they're going to be searching, how do I get rid of bloat? And maybe if I'm a health and wellness podcaster, that episode would pop up. So that's for search engine optimization. I would also say a really easy way to get found is by appearing on other people's podcasts, like me and you are doing right now. I
Oh,
would
hi.
say literally 95% of my clients come from hearing me on podcasts, or
Mm,
people will come listen to my podcast after they hear me on someone else's podcast. And I think that's for a few reasons. I think people are getting your undivided attention for, 45 minutes to an hour and hearing your whole story. If you compare that to social media, which is very fragmented, people are
mhm.
scrolling, tapping, swiping. They're not comprehending your message. Where if they're listening to a podcast, you don't, the way you consume podcasts is not the same as social media. You're not tapping, scrolling, swiping through like a million different podcasts. You know how even when you listen to the radio, you switch stations and you're like, oh, I want to hear the right
True.
song.
Yeah.
It's not like that with podcasting. You go and actually intentionally hit play and you want to hear what that person has to say. So if you think about this from a marketing funnel perspective, this is a very bottom of the funnel tactic, because people are actively choosing to hit play, listen for an hour, and consume what you're saying without being distracted.
I love how you're pointing this out. I heard this. I was watching, by the way, but we need to talk about that too. Podcast and YouTube, it's a thing. Like video podcast. Hello, ma'am. And the thing here is, I was watching, I don't remember this guy. I'm so sorry. I apologize. I don't remember the name of the guy, but he is also working for Think Media. If you're like anything in podcast space, you might have heard about this channel before. Now he's running his own podcast and YouTube. Totally exploded. Amazing journey. And he was talking about that too. How you like have this, there's no other platform like podcast where you have the intention for so long and so undivided like podcast. Like we're always talking about like you only have zero point 0.4 seconds, for example, when you go on a website to really have the attention of a person before clicking away. And Instagram and TikTok and everything is so much like you gotta get a point. You can't be like, so today I was like, you know what I mean? Like you
Yeah.
have to cut to the
Boom. You have
chase.
to hook
Yeah,
them.
like you got, yeah, exactly. You always gotta drop those hooks. And it's like almost feels like a podcast is so cozy. Like you got them. You got, and they're gonna listen like
And
for
they
an hour,
want
one and a
to.
half hours. Exactly. And you got that nowhere else. Nowhere else.
Nowhere else. It truly is the only platform where people don't hate listen. You know how you like sometimes hate follow people or you're like, I don't really like this, but I want to see what they're up to. That's not, people don't do that with podcasting. People, anyone that's listening to your podcast wants to be there. And if you also think this about this from an algorithm perspective, the algorithms on social just show you what you have tapped on and engaged in and think that you're interested in. Podcasting, you don't open an app and it just shoves a show at you and
Mhm.
is like, hopefully you like this. You have to go find the show or you subscribe or and then you hit play. So when you think about that different behavior, someone is taking very much their own time out of their day to devote the hour to your podcast. So that's why it's such a high converting platform, whether you're a guest or you're a host.
I love that. Let's go back to talking about all things marketing because I think we got to, yeah, I mean, marketing your podcast is everything, especially when it comes to being found. You were talking about being booked as a guest. So for somebody like us who loves to have conversations, and I love being on other podcasts too, because you learn so much. Not only do you meet people from like all over the world, which seems to be almost insane, like the world got so much more smaller through that, but also like it opens you up to a whole dedicated, loyal community who, when they trust, I mean, they're on the podcast listening because they already trust the host. And when you're on there, this is like magic, right? Because they will automatically somewhat trust you. What do you recommend? How to go about being booked on podcast?
Sorry, going about being bold.
Booked.
Booked. Going out being booked on podcasts. Yes. I was like
Well,
being
you can
bold
be
and being
bold.
booked. Yeah. I was like, honestly, that is the answer is being bold. That
Okay, there
it's
you
like,
go.
there we go. Yeah, being booked on podcasts. So it's all about positioning, right? So
Mm.
if you look at a podcast, let's keep using the health and wellness example, and all they're talking to is people that talk about gut health. We're making this up, right? And maybe you talk about skin health and how actually skincare products and you're an esthetician. That's a white space that you could fill because you can be like, hey, you always talk about gut health. You've never actually opened up other ways that you can take care of your skin or your health. What about this angle? And that helps them fill a gap that they're going to be like, oh, wow, yeah, I am missing that angle. Like, I didn't think about that before. And if someone is interested in gut health, they probably are interested in their skin. We should have a skin expert come on. Boom, now you're booked. So you just want to find the position where you could fill. You also need to understand how to bring their audience value, not the other way around. So I see this all the time. I get pitched all the time. I used to pitch like this, where you think if you hype yourself up more, that that's going to impress them and they're going to book you. So I get this a lot where it's like, Carly is a five-time winning this, that, and the other
Oh
person,
yeah,
creative director, CEO, entrepreneur, investor, da da da.
New York
She's been
Times
on
bestseller.
12,000, which again, we want to know that people are
Yeah.
credible, but sometimes it's overload. And then it just feels like I don't really understand how you're going to bring my audience value because all I'm
Mm.
hearing is all your achievements and
You.
accolades. I need to know that you listen to the podcast, that you listen to in my non-expert opinion, you know who my audience is, you know what they like, and that you're going to speak the same language because podcasts have different tones, right? There are podcasts that are very serious. There's podcasts that are funny. There's podcasts that are like gossipy girls at brunch. So if you're this very serious person and you want to go on this really funny podcast, you need to then pitch them with like a very comedic tone and maybe change up the energy a little bit so that they don't feel like this is a total mismatch. So this is something I talk about in my work a lot and in my courses because there's so much to it. But I really feel like if you understand how to find the angle, then you don't have to worry about analytics. People get really worried of like, well, I don't have this big Instagram following. I don't have a big email list. Why would anyone say yes to me? And I'm like, I promise you, if you can find that little like back door, you will get booked on podcasts.
And also so much more quicker. Like it
Yes.
accelerates the whole process of building your own podcast, no matter if you're looking for clients or if you're looking to monetizing your podcast. It really doesn't matter what your end goal would have to be with that podcast, but really it accelerates the process. So
Hmm.
talking about marketing, what else do you suggest? What do I do? Jessica wants to market her podcast.
I would also highly recommend a newsletter because a newsletter
Oh,
directly gets delivered to people at a specific time and they opted in to give you their email. Again, going back to algorithms, algorithms are sporadic. They change all the time. We don't really know who is seeing it and who's not. We don't have a guarantee. We can make a guess like, hey, Catherine always likes my photos. I'm assuming she'll see this post, but we don't know. Like that day, you might be like, I deleted Instagram for the weekend. And so I actually didn't see your post. Where
mm-hmm.
if I emailed you my newsletter that you opted into, you're going to get the alert about the podcast, what happened, what were the quotes, and then you're going to be more likely to listen. If you think about it too, it's also you can forward that email, you can copy and paste the links and then share it in your own newsletter. Like if you were really moved by the episode, I do this all the time. Like my newsletters are roundups of other people's things that I like to listen to. So think of
Okay.
it that way. If your podcast is going out to other newsletters, another newsletter might pick it up and say, this is really interesting. We want to share it on our newsletter. So I think newsletters are really underrated. And I really think people should consider having like a dedicated podcast newsletter because you're going to get in front of people that want to be there.
I love that. I'm wondering because I need to I need to really get going with my newsletter thing. My newsletter, by the way, is called Sunday Mail. So if you want to sign up, just saying. But do people, because I know I'm not promoting it enough because
Hmm.
I have a freebie and everything, but do people still sign up? What is your experience working with your clients with your own newsletter? Do people still sign up for newsletters? That's what I'm wondering because we all know everybody's getting all of those emails every single day. Like, what would you say?
I would say they sign up when they find value. I would say what deters people from signing up is when they wanted a freebie and then they just get it and they're like, okay, I just wanted the PDF.
Okay.
I don't need to stay in the sequence or I don't want to stay in this funnel. But I find newsletters really fascinating when either A, they're short and educational. Like I follow this storytelling one and he just gives a storytelling tip every week with an example of how it was used in a movie or a book or something, and then gives you a tip on how to do it yourself. That's really valuable to me because I'm a storyteller and I want to learn how to tell better stories. So I love reading that one. There's other ones that do the roundups where it's like, here's 5 things I loved listening to this week, or 5 things you might find interesting, and that's very interesting. It sends me down
Yes.
all these rabbit holes. It's someone I admire and I like how their brain works. So then I get to see what they like. Those are really popular. That's called like curation. So you're curating things and you're sharing with people. Those are really, really big right now. And then I also think really vulnerable emails, right? Because these are
Mm,
things that people aren't sharing on Instagram because they don't want to. They want to share it with people that opted in to follow them. So maybe something that you didn't share on the podcast, you could share in your email newsletter. And then that's how you promote it and say, by the way, there's something I share in my newsletter that you're not going to see on Instagram. You have to go sign up to
yes.
find out more. And that will obviously attract people.
So good. There's something. So since you're in G, like in OG, when it comes to the podcast game, by the way, OG is original gangster. They
Original
they
gangster.
they call like YouTubers from the like early days, they call themselves OG. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. You're YouTube OG. So I know that like consistency as in for everything, specifically when it comes to social media, is key, right? First of all, what do you recommend? Like, how often do I need to publish? And then, second, a question which I really am dying to know your answer on is when you do and put in all of the work, what do you do when you don't see the results that you're really looking for and it gets overwhelming?
Okay. So the first one is how often should you publish? If we're just talking podcasting and growth, weekly honestly is the way to go. Like
Yeah,
just the more the better. And I know it's people don't want to hear that, but it's true. Like
yeah,
in a podcast industry where everyone is publishing weekly and sometimes now even 2 to 3
twice.
times a week,
Mm,
then it's worth it to if you're looking for growth. But here's where I want to caveat something. If you're a business owner and you start a podcast, and all you start looking at is downloads and listens and follows, you're actually looking at the wrong metric. You need to be looking at, are people signing up for my email list and freebie? Are they booking discovery calls? Are they filling out my applications? Are they joining my courses? And that's where people go wrong with podcasting, get really frustrated. This happened recently with someone where they launched a podcast. They're booking the most incredible guests, like huge high profile guests. Their podcast already is in like the top 5%. They're consistent, they're publishing, people are loving it, they have great reviews, but they keep looking at their downloads and they're like, my downloads suck. I can't believe these downloads suck. And I'm like, but you're looking at the wrong metric because you're a business owner. You're actually aligning with all these very credible people that are going to be sharing the episode, build your online visibility. You're going to be getting more people signing up for your courses, which did happen. She had an amazing month in business. But when you start looking at it as like, oh, I want to be a full-time podcaster that's sponsored by, Spotify, those are two different things. That's being an
yeah,
influencer. So people get this really mixed up to the point where I've done 2 podcast episodes about it because I used to work in the influencer marketing world and I understand that world really well and I understand online business. So it's funny because I can feel that way too, where you're like, I just put so much effort into the production and the marketing. Why
yeah,
doesn't this have like 5,000 downloads? But it's like, here's why I don't care. I would rather have 100 downloads and 5 people reach out to work with me one on one, high
yes,
ticket, than have 5,000 people that listened and maybe sent me a DM like, that was an amazing episode. That's nice. That's nice, right? We want to get the DMs. But if you're a business owner and you're looking at your podcast to bring you business, you need to be looking at business metrics, not listens and downloads. Now, if you're an influencer and you want to get sponsored and you're like, I need brand sponsors, then you need to look at analytics and downloads because that's what brands will look at. But it's really important to delineate which bucket you fall in because if not, that is when people start to feel really confused and overwhelmed and like, this isn't working, this sucks. So that's why I wanted to add this disclaimer to the first part of, how consistent should you be? It really depends on your goals. Like I know someone else that she posts bi-weekly and she's very clear about that with her audience, but they now know what to expect from her. And she's like, these bi-weekly 30-minute episodes are doing really well for my business. Like my business is well oiled and running, but it's not like she's going to be approached by, Sirius XM for $100 million deal. Like that's not going to happen because that's not her goal. She's not trying to be a full-time podcaster. So again, be honest with yourself and which one are you trying to do? Because then you can look at the metrics a bit differently. And then your second question, I think, was what do you do when you feel like you're doing all the right things? You have the
you're
newsletter, the Instagram,
overwhelmed. Yeah.
you're overwhelmed. I would say do an energy check, right? Like, what is a platform that you're just not having fun on? For me, I
Mm,
have way more fun on threads than I do on actual Instagram. I like scrolling on TikTok, but I don't like creating on TikTok. So for me, I was like, I'm actually not going to post my clips on TikTok. I'm not going to try to figure out the hooks and let me catch your attention in 10 seconds. I
the
was like, I just
dances.
don't. Yeah, I'm like, I don't have the time, the energy. I don't want to. Like, I do
Yeah.
not post on TikTok. I actually don't even post my episodes on YouTube because I just don't have the bandwidth right now. So for
Mhm.
me, Threads works really well, Instagram stories, newsletters, and again, being on people's podcasts. But I've had to consciously say, we're not doing TikTok, we're not doing YouTube, we're not
Yes.
doing any other platform. Like I've had to let things go. So I would urge people to look at like what their capacity is and also what can you off board or maybe delegate. So a big thing that people get overwhelmed with is editing. And here's my like very new argument that's come into my head lately is people will pay me
Uh-huh.
thousands of dollars for strategy. Okay. Thousands and thousands of dollars to work with me on strategy. And then I'll tell them you should get an editor that's $50 an episode. And for the whole year, if you paid $1,000, you would have all your stuff covered. And you would get all this mental space back to actually just outline the podcast, reach out to people, focus on other efforts, and people will not do it. And they're like, I just can't pay $50 an episode. I don't want to, I can edit myself. And I understand that when you're like, I'm not making money on this podcast, so I shouldn't
Hmm.
be paying for
Investing.
production.
Yeah.
But I'm like, then why are you paying me
Me.
thousands of dollars for content strategy? That doesn't really make sense. Like, I would actually rather people pay me and work with me once and then just spend the rest of the money on editing,
Editor.
because I really think editing is where people get hung up. Even if you know how to do it, even if you're like, it just takes an hour, it's the mental real estate that you're losing.
Capacity. You know
Yeah.
what I do, and I've been doing it since day one. Is I would just so be happy I could do that for video episodes as well. Is edit when I only do audio, so I'm recording in GarageBand. I do it while I go.
Ooh.
And that is not only saving the biggest amount of time, however, I'm done. When the episode is done, like I'm good, baby, I'm done. Like upload it, bye, good to go.
Bye. Oh my God, I
We're
love
done.
that.
It's saves. I've been doing that since day one because listen, I got 3 kids, I got business, we ain't got time to play, right?
Yeah.
So just edit while you go. When you know you effed up, cut it, go back, delete it, go. It saves
Yes.
and also, this is what I want to say is I've never been working with an editor. I did used to work with somebody uploading it, doing the show notes because that is messing with my head, okay? But I wouldn't necessarily want to work it with an editor because I'm scared they're editing the wrong thing.
Mm. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what I'm scared of. Like they at the end of the day, they're gonna leave something. I really don't want it to remain in the podcast episode. So I edit while I go, and I'm good. It's just so super easy. Again, GarageBand is like, can we have a? By the way, can we have a sponsorship from GarageBand?
seriously, you shouted them out
Seriously,
quite a bit.
they're so easy. And what I wanted to add when you were saying like the metrics and how you would probably consider your success as in how many leads will you get, how many clients do you have, how many discovery calls versus being an influencer, hitting the charts and monetizing. I think this is something you really want to be clear on when you start your podcast because your whole entire strategy will build up on that goal. Like you can't do necessarily both. You really have to decide. And I think this is where a lot of the struggle comes in. Like, and this is probably also something most people don't even know. Like, you have to know what is your goal moving forward. Do you want to be an influencer? Do you want to eventually monetize your podcast and being sponsored by Nike and GarageBand, or putting it out there in the universe? Or do you want to really achieve clients? Because that would have to be a whole different strategy.
100%. And people always do this. I've worked with every single type of client that you can think of, and it always starts with, I just want to do this for fun. I want people to hear my voice. I want a different platform. And yeah, I do want to drive business to what I'm doing. And so I'm like, okay, if we're trying to drive business, then we need to be thinking of a strategy that will drive people to your offers and your work, right? But then
Yeah.
they go on the podcast and they're talking about dating and their travels and sex and this and that. And then their business is about, I don't know, how to manage your money. And I'm like, we can talk about all that if you
Yeah.
then tie in a money management piece, but then they get really frustrated and they're like, my podcast isn't working. It doesn't feel like I'm doing it right, da da da. And I'm like, because like you said, from the get-go, we didn't outline the strategy and they
Yeah.
want to be more of like a Call Her Daddy or a Diary of a CEO where they're talking
Mm-hmm.
about whatever they want. Because if you look at those people, they are full-time podcasters and influencers. I should also add this too. I think it's really important. You have to have a lot of money to be at that level.
Oh,
Steven
yeah.
from Diary of a CEO, he
Yes.
said he spent, I'm not even kidding. I think he said he spent $40,000 on equipment. He has 6 full-time team members just working on the podcast. He has 2 people full-time that just work on the trailers. He has an
Yeah.
editor, he has a social media strategist, a PR manager, a booking agent. I mean, this guy made the podcast his business. You know what I mean? He's spending six figures, if not millions of dollars on it, which got him to the level he's at. So I just want to be clear that like when people are inquiring with me of like, I want to be the next Steven or the next Alex Cooper or these, huge podcasters, I'm like, you have to remember they had a lot of money and a lot of backing when they started. They didn't just bootstrap the podcast themselves.
He invested, I believe, like six figures. I love Stephen Bartlett. I love him so much. He's so inspiring. And I wish he was 10 plus years older and single. However, no, he's a genius. He's not only such an outstanding entrepreneur, the way he's thinking, like I would love to pick his mind. I find it fascinating listening to
Fascinating.
him. How his mind is working is unmatched anything else I've like. This is a person when I get that notification, better believe I'm gonna click on it. Like
Hmm.
he opens his mouth, it's value coming out. And I'm not sure if you saw that. He actually was talking about, by the way, his podcast social media manager. I follow her on Instagram too. It is so
Grace.
fast. Yes,
Hmm.
exactly. Thank you. I forgot the name. And they now, I think they have just founded another business, started another business,
Yes.
and they actually do podcasts for other people. And I just saw recent stories this morning, and
Yeah.
they just published a new podcast, and it's already hitting like, and this is where it goes. It's like seeing stories like this where people have all the money to invest in a team, to invest in the equipment, like the studios. Blah. It's like giving goals, right?
That's what I'm
But
saying.
it's like so disencouraging for people who just really want to start with their iPhone and a stock on top. It's like Stephen Bartlett, here I come.
Yeah. And
Watch
I'm
out.
like,
And then literally getting like 2 downloads in the first month. It's like, where do we go from here?
yeah. And you know what I always do is backtrack those people, look at where they started, right? They started by
Mm-hmm.
just creating content, putting it out, one
Yeah.
episode, two episodes, three. Like Steven's episode number one probably has nowhere near the same views, downloads, etc. Maybe now people have gone back, but when it started, I
Yeah.
doubt that it was blowing up, right? He also had to optimize and test and say, okay, maybe we do need to add video. Maybe we do need better trailers. Maybe we do need to cut things out and be more provocative. Like you've seen how his podcast has evolved over time, but he would only be able to evolve and optimize because he started it. So anyone that's like, oh, see, I don't even want to start. Well, you have to start. If you want to optimize and
Yeah.
evolve, you need something that is tangible to optimize and evolve.
And also, if you want to start a podcast, don't consider Stephen Bartlett because he has started with money. But there
Started with
are,
money.
however, so many podcasts out there who literally started with the sock on top of their iPhone. So
Yes.
rather, when it comes to picking a role model, start with somebody like this.
Start with someone that's just 1 to 2 steps ahead of you, not 100.
Exactly. And also, what I think we have to mention, this is going back to being booked as a guest and booking guests. See what Steven does. Every did he ever have a solo episode? I don't think so.
Barely. Like I think he's done
Right?
maybe a handful.
Exactly. So really just consider the whole guest thing because if you love to connect to people, if you want to learn something, you're going to just enjoy it so much. And something else I wanted to add on you talking about you really have to pick your social media platform because you, for the sake of it, cannot post on all of them. And
No.
I can tell because I'm currently posting on multiple platforms with a really think about where like what social media platform besides the podcast would your ICA, your ideal client avatar, actually turn to? So if you're posting on TikTok, but your ideal customer, client, whatever, is never on TikTok, makes no sense, right? But
Right.
also, what is it that you love the most? Because you really want to stay focused. So for me, it's like I love TikTok personally myself too. However, I went viral now on TikToks a few
Mm.
times, and I was like, "Oh, this is working," and then it was not working anymore. And
I
now
was
I'm
gonna
like, is
ask
that
you about
two
that.
200 view jail again? So I did listen. I'm like being the business owner here. I had a chart. I was like putting in the Excel sheet. I was like putting in like how many hashtags did I use, and one video had almost 260,000 views. Then one more than 120 or something, one 100, and then a 60 and stuff like that. So And I was like, what the heck did I do? I just don't figure it out. But I'm like at the point where I'm like, okay, you really have to watch your energy and really be mindful. What is
Mindful and demure.
mindful? Thank you. Mindful and demure about. I love this woman. Mindful and demure where you want to post.
Yeah. And to your point, I'm so happy you brought up the virality thing and thinking like, oh my God, 260,000 people. I'm probably about to make thousands and thousands, if not millions of dollars. And
No,
that's not what
no,
happens.
no, no,
That's how it
nothing.
happens. You know what
No.
happens? Someone made a good point. I interviewed this woman last year that she started the platform Love in London, and it's a YouTube channel, it's an Instagram channel, and it's helping expats that are coming to London adjust. And she's like, we post on TikTok and the tone is a bit snarky and gossipy. And so it goes viral all the time because people, like to argue online. And so it goes viral. And she goes, to be honest, I hate when we go viral because then we get like a 13-year-old that lives in a random town in Northern England that is
Yeah.
not even close to our audience. We're helping
No.
American expats immigrate into London, not a 13-year-old English guy that lives in the countryside. And she's like, and then what happens is they start following us and then they start taking over the comment section and it turns really ugly. And it's like, this is never what we wanted. We want people that
No.
are ideal clients. We'd rather have, again, 100 people commenting that actually like what we do versus
Yes.
10,000 that are random people. It's like, you know what I think of? It's like a party. Imagine if you had a dinner party and you're like, I want
Yeah.
these 10 cool women entrepreneurs. We're going to talk about business and podcasting and storytelling. And then all of a sudden, a guy comes in that wants to talk about farming. And then another guy comes in that wants to talk about protein powder or something. And you're like, what
Yes.
the hell? This is like not what the party was supposed to be about. And that's kind of what happens when you go viral.
And also, two things about TikTok. I think what people are really focusing on TikTok right now is the creator program because you can
Mm-hmm.
make money. However,
Yeah.
it's not even close to the money you can make on YouTube. And then second, and this is something where I really like was coming to peace with TikTok. I heard that last year there was a huge conference of YouTubers and TikTokers and everything in the US. I think it was on the West Coast. And now the people like the YouTube creators who had like millions of followers, it was overcrowded. People waiting for them in lines for hours. And then there were the TikTok creators, millions of followers. It was empty. It was literally empty, not just one, but
Isn't that
multiple ones.
crazy?
Like it is, I think what it comes down to, it is so incredibly difficult to build a real community on TikTok.
Yes. Agreed.
Like this kind of active community on TikTok, so difficult.
And this is why so many Instagram and TikTok stars start podcasts because they need
Uh-huh.
community. Like, do you remember Tinks? Tinks, she blew up on TikTok and Instagram a few years ago. Then she got a book deal. Then she was going on a bunch of podcasts. And then eventually she got a huge podcast deal with Sirius XM. That's not by accident. Her
No.
team was like, hey, we can't just keep posting on Instagram and TikTok and going viral. We need, to your point, we need you at events and selling them out. We need you to go on tours and speaking. The only way you can really start to do that is by having a bigger connection with your audience, which is why she started a podcast.
I love that. That is so true. Like really focus your energy on the things that you love the most because that's going to be aligned with your ICA. And then really
Amen.
invest your time and energy because also for most of us, it's just going to start as a side hustle and not your full
Mm-hmm.
time. All right,
Okay.
Chelsea. Is there any like last advice? Because by now I know everybody started working on their podcast. Anything you want to put out there? Like, what is it that people have to know starting a podcast?
I think for me, it's the name of my podcast, in my non-expert
Mm-hmm.
opinion, is that you
Yeah.
don't need to be an expert to start a podcast. I was
Mm.
very much, for some reason, comparing myself to, again, like morning show hosts and news journalists and reporters and being like, I have to create an actual production, Hollywood production to be able to podcast. And that prevented me from starting my podcast for a year. And I sat on the idea, didn't do it. And you have to think about this. The time is going to pass anyway. So if you want to start a
Yeah.
podcast now or in 5 years, the 5 years is going to go by anyway. So you might as well start it
Yeah.
now and then see what happens in 5 years versus waiting another 5 years to get started. So that's why I named my podcast In My Non-Expert Opinion is I have a lot of opinions. They're not all expert, but the hope is that you come, you have fun, you learn something, you enjoy, and that pressure taken off of me to have this like expert level podcast has completely gone out the window and allowed me to be consistent. To be honest, that's what got me to the 250 plus episodes.
That's insane. That's such a huge accomplishment. Also, I believe when it comes to title, like yours is so catchy.
Thank you.
No, because if you have to think about like another self-development podcast, nobody's gonna remember that name, but that name is like it's gonna stick now. Only you have to cross out the non, but anywho.
Yeah. I know. That's the thing. I'm working on something. I'm like, maybe I need to have a podcast that's an expert podcast about podcasting and then a lifestyle one that's maybe more non-expert, which goes back to my point of like influencing and lifestyle content
Yeah.
versus business content. And that's the point I'm at too, is they're not the same thing. And so I needed to actually separate them.
So you're gonna start the second one?
I think so. I think so. This is
Ooh,
exclusive news. This is exclusive.
exclusive. You heard it first over
You heard
here.
it first here.
I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
yeah. I'm
Well,
I'm
then
working
you're
behind
gonna
the
come
scenes.
back for sure. Then you're gonna come
Yeah.
back. I love that. And this is, by the way, why I call my podcast "You Can and You Will," because if you put your mind to you will. Like you, there is there is something I learned that from my dad. Like, don't give yourself the space to even come up with excuses.
I love that. I'm
Like
obsessed with that.
you just gonna go ahead and do it. So full stop.
Yeah, and that's the thing. No one is going to hand it to you, right? No one's going to knock on your
No.
door and say, "Hey, can you please start a podcast? We've been begging and
Yeah.
waiting for you." It's like if you start it, then people react to something. Here's one last example, and then we can wrap it up. Is I think I love this example though, is when you go to a pottery class and you have the ball
Mm-hmm.
of clay and
Mm-hmm.
in your head you're like, I'm going to make a bowl. So then
Ooh,
you
yeah.
start making the bowl and then you're like, wait, this is getting really tall really quick. And now I think it's going to be a vase. Okay, yeah, now it's a vase. Wait, maybe now it's like for water. And then by the end you have this whole different thing. That's how anything you're creating works. It's a ball of clay that you don't know what it's going to look like until you start, but you don't know if it's going to be a bowl or a vase until you literally get your hands wet and start working with the clay. That's how I think of podcasting too.
Chelsea, that is so powerful. Like what I always say, fail forward, but I like your example, which is so much more. Yeah, but I literally started imagining, like visualizing the clay, and I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense. And here I come with just fail forward, just go ahead and fail forward. I love that. Chelsea, I could honestly go ahead for hours now. Thank you
Same.
so much.
Thank you. This has been
I'm gonna
so
ask you
fun.
now, everybody listening, you will be back, right? Just
Yes,
that
yes,
I got
yes,
my businesses over here.
yes.
Thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom. And I will put all of your links down below in my show notes. By the way, loving your homepage, your website.
Thank you. Thank
Do
you.
you use Show It? Yes, you do, right?
I do no Squarespace.
Ooh, sponsorship, Squarespace. Just we could make a list for this
We
episode.
do.
So
We do need a list.
truly, like if you want to see an amazing website, go make sure and check out Chelsea's. I love it.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.